This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall and Stephen Maresca.
Good morning and welcome to Cybersound Podcast. Today we're joined by Michael Grandy, the CEO of TB&G Incorporated. Michael happens to be my boss as well. And today we're going to discuss the cost of security, changing the way we think and being more proactive in your spend. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, this will be fun. I'm looking forward to doing it. So information security is usually considered a cost center. And I think that's one of the things that, when I'm talking to prospective clients, tends to be one of the prevailing concerns, right? It's easier to spend money a little bit reactively, I find, versus proactively. And making that case for the why is something that I've really had to think through, right? And try to determine where security dollars are best spent. What is the rationale for doing it? And a lot of time I hear customers talk about maybe the negative reasons why they should spend money on security. But I think I want to actually start with the inverse of that and talk a little bit about the positive side. So, one thing I know that we hear a lot is our companies that ask for third-party risk assessments. And I think there's a real opportunity there for people to be able to spend money proactively, attesting or demonstrating that they've spent or are cognizant of sort of being better security partners, right? And I'm wondering if you see that on your side at all, or in conversation with people.
Absolutely. I think one of the drivers in sort of shifting the conversation and the discussion about security is changing the mindset from a cost center to an investment, and how that can really benefit both business owners and managers and IT folks within an organization. Years ago, a lot of the discussion was spent around sort of infrastructure build and where data was going to live and sort of speeds and feeds. And I think now, understanding the importance of security and integrating it and weaving it into every other aspect of someone's IT infrastructure and having those conversations concurrently is so vital and so important. I certainly know that we see it on the MSP side, and in the conversations that we have with our clients, integrating cybersecurity as a key component of sort of defense in depth and adding layers for both the company's scalability and ability to grow, and also for their protection of data and other things. It's really vital, and it's a key discussion point now.
It seems like it's a real opportunity to differentiate yourself from competition as well. I feel like, I'm in the security space, so we get asked all the time what our certifications are. NIST 800-171, SOC 2, right? There's, just to name a couple, there's a ton of things out there that people can comply with or adhere to, or sort of balance their security program against. Do you think that there is value when you're working with a security company or any company really that they adhere to some standard like that? Absolutely.
We could speak just about our own company and about the sort of learning that we've done since 2017-18 and building Vancord and understanding how we needed to integrate some more security protocols and other endeavors internally to make ourselves better organizationally and more secure, and the value that had for our own business. I think people sometimes view security as, we said cost center, but also sort of like insurance, which is, it's, hey, I have to have this. I have to spend money on insurance, and rather than looking at it as an investment. And so, insurance is good unless you don't have it when you need it. And it's right. The same with sort of that as you always refer to, security fundamentals. If you're not doing what you need to do all along, then it's not scalable, because then you've got a really, really big investment, a one-time to uplift yourself to where you need to be. And that has a direct effect on your bottom line.
Right.
So, I think we've seen the benefit of it internally, better procedures, better protocols, better policies, and it makes every aspect of our business better. I think from an external perspective, obviously we have, better reputation. We're more insurable when it comes to those insurances that we have to carry between general liability and professional liability and cyber liability. But more than that, it allows us to be scalable. So, we were an organization of 30 people, three years ago, and we're up to over 50 now. And I think that all of those layers that we built, sort of predicated as security fundamentals as to everything we're doing, and having some of the new protocols and things that we've implemented has been fantastic.
So one of the things that you actually said that resonates with me is the idea that you're a good partner, right? Or that you have a good relationship. And I think that cuts both ways, right? So you can be a good partner with your insurance company by really doing the right things on the security side, hopefully keeping your premiums lower by demonstrating that you're doing those critical security qualities that they look for. I think you're also a good partner with companies that you work with, right? Whether they're clients that we serve or maybe relationships we have with other vendors, you want to be able to demonstrate that you take security seriously, that you're protecting your clients or your partner's data. Mistakes can happen, right? We're in the incident response business. We see incidents all the time with companies that have done the right things and are just a victim. And it's a lot better conversation with companies that you work with if you can say, here's a standard we adhered to, here's all the things that we did proactively, and it's unfortunate, but we had an incident. Very different conversation than we ignored all of the advice from all these companies that we've had, and by the way, we still had an incident. I'd rather be in the former, right?
Yeah, and so that trust that sort of develops through that partnership is so key. Years ago, I was in the banking industry, and there was this concept that was sort of bandied about as the regulatory burden. And small banks, community banks, which I was participating in at the time in commercial lending, we felt it because we would have these audits from either the FDIC or the state banking department, and you really felt the pressure to not only comply with all of these various audits and all these different standards, but that the game was always changing. And there wasn't really a sort of a trusted partner or an advocate that would come out and support you in the endeavors, help you guide the way. And I think back to your comment about sort of the NIST framework and understanding that, hey, there are these things that exist out there that are roadmaps and are guides to protecting your organization better and steps that you can take. As a small bank at the time, we felt like we were a bit on an island and that we were being held hostage. Every time something new came out, it was just fee driven, and that we had to, increase this fee, pay more to this external auditor.
Right.
And there wasn't that sort of symbiotic relationship where it was like, we're being guided here, and we know sort of there may not be an end result because the rules will change and we'll have to keep up, but at least we know we're on the right path. And I know Vancord, really seeks to do that with its clients, and the same on TB&G Consulting side. We've worked so hard to be that trusted advisor. So there's some really, I think there's great opportunity to earn that trust moving forward.
And I think we've seen shifts in some of the standards where they've gotten maybe a little shorter, maybe a little clearer about what the expectations are to actually meet or comply with them. But I do think there's an increasing sensitivity or understanding that having a good security program can be a positive in help you win business or retain clients, right? And I think that's different than what I would say was a more common conversation that I had maybe even a half dozen years ago, slightly longer, which would be compliance driving your security program. And it was all about protecting yourself against the potential negatives, right? The fines, the legal fees, right? And I think we should segue into that a little bit. So people typically or traditionally looked at it and said, I need to avoid these problems, not I need to prepare myself to win business. So on the avoiding side, right, there's legitimate regulatory fines. And I think talking about your banking background, I'm sure that's something that was in conversation all the time.
Absolutely. And it would come from a variety of different places, and you had to be very aware of this is pre GDPR and a lot of other things that have come around with privacy, really even prior to the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. There's so many different areas, slippery slopes that you can fall down if you're not doing a good job protecting the data in different ways, especially in banking. One of the areas I know that you've mentioned and talked a lot about is sort of like the HIPAA guidelines and regulatory fines that come along with that. I don't have as much experience in the healthcare area, but I know that our clients who are in that industry really think about this all the time.
Right, and there's real risk there. I mean, I've spoken with clients that have had HIPAA fines as a result of essentially screen scraping, right? People looking over the shoulder, seeing data that they shouldn't, and they report that as an incident. And that's a really easy thing to avoid. We hear on the news all the time about these multi-million record losses, and I think it's hard to wrap your head around it a little bit because, frankly, most of us don't deal on that scale. And an incident that I dealt with once was significantly smaller. 10,000 records. The client offered notification and credit monitoring to their customer base. About 2,000 people opted in. So that's a number I think we can relate to. Right? 2,000 records.
Absolutely.
The total cost of that incident for them was just under $100,000. So not a huge exposure. Frankly, wasn't that complicated to address. Legitimate sort of requirements for them to notify and sort of make their customers whole, and it's expensive. And that was a customer I think that did the right thing largely in the security space. They happened to be a victim of sort of a reasonably well-crafted phishing exercise. It's expensive, and unfortunately, a lot of the companies that we deal with have records right in that number.
But citing that, I mean, there seems like there's also a sort of a time cost formula as well, and you may not totally understand how long or how deep potential breach goes. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think there's numbers, right? So I think the average cost now per record in a breach, I think, is $180, $180, $189, right in that neighborhood, right? So per record has gone up annually. I know they factor into that lost business and notification costs and things like that, right? So it's a little bit of a combination of what was the business impact versus what was the actual spend. There's also sort of a significant cost reduction if you can identify an incident earlier on. And I think the average time is about 250 days from the time an attacker, say, lands in an environment to the time they're discovered. A lot of damage can be done in that length of time, right? So the quicker that you can discover or identify a threat and sort of contain it, certainly the less expensive it's going to be. And frankly, your communications are better, right? It's a lot better to talk to your customers and say, we discovered this within a week, right? That's better than we discovered this in 3/4 of a year.
And going back to your comment about sort of trust, I mean, obviously one of the bigger components to that is your reputational impact,
right?
And how a breach or an incident can really, it can linger. It can be sort of water of undetermined depth, and beyond that, once sort of public notification becomes a reality, that has a substantial business impact.
It does,
and I think we have to be cognizant of that, both for organizations who may not even know that at the time that they're just discovering something going on. It's a little bit different than perhaps what the market experienced with Colonial Pipeline and some of the other more popular ransomware type incidents when there's phishing campaigns, other things, and sort of the surface attack vectors and all the things we talk about all the time, and where sort of the highest probability of a breach can come from. But yeah, that reputational impact is huge.
It's huge, and again, it's a partnership thing. If you can have a conversation with your customer, and I'm a big fan of transparency, so I think if you can talk to your customers early during that incident discovery period, it strengthens the relationships that you're trying to establish. So I prefer to say, hey, we had an event that we are investigating, and we're letting you know early so that you understand where we're at in the investigation phase, and we'll keep you informed as we make progress. That's better than saying, we discovered what we thought was a breach a month ago, and we spent a month sort of secretly trying to determine what the impact might be, and now that we think it's serious, we're going to let you know. People do that, and there's an argument or a case to be made sometimes for being careful about what you say or tell people. with your business partners in particular, I think it's important to have open, honest, transparent conversations, even if that means there's going to be a difficult conversation.
Absolutely. I was just reminded of another very public incident that happened, probably 5 years ago, maybe more, with Target, and sort of how that even came to be through a third-party vendor that was working on a system and didn't realize it at the time, and that's where a huge exposure came from. Yeah,
and that made the news. The big thing for that was, they're going to lose so much business, and I don't know, maybe for a short period of time, maybe.
Sure.
But I go to Target, I feel perfectly comfortable there
Absolutely.
now, and I think they handled it well enough. But of course, then they did a nice job recovering from a marketing standpoint, for sure. And that's a component of this, right?
So you're saying on one end you've got sort of the Targets and the Colonial Pipelines and these really large enterprises that probably have they're more adept or have systems in place to handle this, or maybe more acutely aware of the risks. Sort of go down the line to small businesses, startups and some of the clients that we see, mutually on a regular basis. What's the conversation starter to convince either that business owner or that founder that is really trying to figure out where to invest those dollars early on, that smart things to do when it comes to security doesn't necessarily need to be the fanciest piece of software or the fanciest box that says that it could do everything. How do you start that discussion, and how do you sort of lead them down the path?
So, I'd say if you haven't listened to the security fundamentals, right, to anybody listening to this, if you haven't listened to security fundamentals yet, you should go back to episode 1, because I think that's where it all starts. It's not about making huge investments in infrastructure or hardware very often. It's about patching and password management and some security awareness training. But there's some really, in my opinion, really inexpensive ways to improve the security culture of a company. Make yourself less of a target, improve that general understanding, and frankly be able to talk with your customers about what you're doing internally to advance that sort of culture of security. And I think that's an important thing to do. I personally don't like to lead with fear. It's easy in the security industry, right? There's always negative things that happen, but I think there are good reasons, right? Non-fear-based reasons to do this stuff. Winning business and retaining customers, I think, is a big one, and we're starting to see more of that. And frankly, that gives me some gratitude, because I think you're seeing that culture change a little bit now.
Yeah, for sure. I think the selling on the basis of fear. I mean, there's a time for urgency. Sure. I think. But maybe fear and urgency can be sort of mutually exclusive as it relates to that.
Then they should be. I don't want to run around. The sky is falling with people. Maybe some clients it legitimately is more, but you need to have that relationship in place to be able to convince somebody that that's the fact anyway. So, I know we're roughly up against time here. I think I do want to end a little bit by saying in a future podcast we will discuss an interesting bill that happened here in Connecticut, House Bill 6607, which is actually legislation that is designed to help insulate companies who have adopted a security standard against lawsuits. So I think that's something we'll want to spend a little bit of time on. And it's an interesting segue to this, because it definitely gives companies an additional reason to make a proactive spend and hopefully protect themselves, right? It's slightly akin to insurance, and we'll explore that a little bit more. But with that, I'd like to thank you, Michael, for joining.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. If anybody's interested in exploring, this topic a little bit more, or frankly has ideas for future topics, hit us up at Vancord Security on Twitter. We're happy to create a topic here that is of interest to everybody. And with that, I appreciate everybody's time. I hope you got something out of this, and thank you.
Stay vigilant. Stay resilient. This has been Cyber Sound.